That just makes everybody feel nice and comfortable. So I'd like to actually thank each and every one of you for coming. I only thought about 5 or 6 people would come, so my mind's kind of blown a bit. And because I know a lot of people are very time poor nowadays. We're very busy, and so I really thank you for taking the time and effort for coming tonight. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Devaki Nandana dasi. And for those of you who know me, know that I can rave for a very long time. And I know, because I don't want to have this class go too long because people have got to go to work tomorrow and things like that. So I've actually tried to write out a sort of an overview of what I'm going to talk to try and keep myself contained, okay? So you're lucky. And can you see these down here? My plan of action is at the end of each class, because it's a 3-part course, at the end of each class I was giving people class notes to take home. And so I only did there's only 10 here. So I will photocopy some more up during the week, and I'll bring them along next week. So I'll hand them out next week because it's kind of not fair which 10 I pick out. So I'll bring them along next week, plus next week's class notes as well. So you'll get them all together. And because my idea was this is this week's class notes, and then each week I hand you them out and you just open the folder and stick them in. And at the end of the 3-part course, you've got some notes there that'll hopefully help you remember some of the things that we talked about. So that'll be next week. I'm going to allow a little bit of time at the end of the class for people to ask questions. So please, any questions you've got, you're quite welcome to ask questions. And if during the week you think of something that you didn't ask or something, you can ask it next week, even though it won't be for that week's class, okay? You can bring along a question, write it down or something like that. Questions are fantastic because what one person asks a question, I guarantee you half of the audience will be thinking, oh, I'm so glad they asked that question. Okay? So you're kind of helping other people by asking a question as well. So as I explained, it's a 3-part course. 3 parts doesn't really make a course, but we're going to call it that. The Bhagavad Gita is 700 verses. How are we going to do this in just 3 hours? An hour each is not possible. So we're just touching upon it. And the first class tonight, I want to go into history, the history from 2 angles. I want to go into the history of the Bhagavad Gita so you understand where it's coming from when we start it, right? Where it's the whole build-up to it, and also the actual Bhagavad Gita, the book itself. So, and then we'll actually, at the end of the class tonight, we're going to look at chapter 1. But hopefully you'll have more of a grounding with all this history we're going to go into. And I promise I'm trying not to make it boring history, okay? Actually, I loved history when I went to school, so history's not boring to me. But some people go, they just roll their eyes. So that's what we're going to do tonight. And then the next 2 classes, we're actually going to look at a chapter 2 in next week's class. And the 3rd week, we're zipping right ahead to chapter 15. But I chose those chapters because I think they give little overviews of very important points being made in the Bhagavad Gita. And I was talking to my sister just maybe 2 days ago, yesterday or 2 days ago, and I said to her, I actually feel a little unhappy that I'm giving, 3-part course to people and saying, look, the Bhagavad Gita is amazing. And we just do three little classes, and that's it. It's like, bye-bye. And I said to her, I actually feel like I've made this amazing ice cream with these amazing flavours in it and all sorts of things, and then I've given every single one of you one lick. That's all you get. Then I pull it away. So I said, well, what can I do about this? And so what I'm going to do in the coming month or so, I'm going to make a podcast of Bhagavad Gita chapters, so that any of you guys who like to listen to podcasts, or who have never even listened to a podcast maybe, you can have the podcast on your phones or whatever, and whenever you feel like it, you can listen to it, either just a verse or a couple of verses, depending on your time, or even a whole chapter if you want to do it. Just lie down and listen to a chapter, or sit on the train and listen to something from the Bhagavad Gita, so that I'm not just giving you one lick. I'm going to give you the whole ice cream, okay? So, because the Bhagavad Gita is absolutely fascinating. That's the word that always comes to my mind. If somebody says, sum it up, the Bhagavad Gita, I go, it's absolutely fascinating. And the etymology of the word fascinating is from the Latin fascino, which means to captivate. And the Bhagavad Gita captivates you, it captivates your mind and it captivates your heart. It's just truly amazing. In this world, in our life, every day we're fascinated by things, every day. Things fascinate us. The businessmen make sure we're fascinated, don't they, by all their new products. And every day we're fascinated by things, we're captivated by things. But by hearing the Bhagavad Gita, you start to become fascinated by that eternal side of life. And you'll find it actually brings so much peacefulness and pleasure to your heart. When we get fascinated by the material, we end up frustrated. That fascination leads to frustration a lot of the time. But when you become fascinated by the eternal, it's very satisfying. So I hope that you guys become a little bit fascinated by the Bhagavad Gita. So, I'm going to turn this on. Do I have to make a separate recording, or this will all take care of it? Yeah, okay. I was going to record it myself on my phone so that I could do the podcast, but they've got all this set up now, so I won't have to do that. Okay. So before I start, I would like to offer my respects first to my spiritual teacher from whom I'm learning and hearing the Bhagavad Gita. So first of all, I offer respects to him, Jagatguru Siddha Swarupananda, and also to the long line of great saintly people who've taken great care to pass down this wonderful Vedic knowledge contained in the Bhagavad Gita. So I offer my respects to them as well and thank them. And I will try my best to just speak on their behalf to you. Try not to add any of my own little silliness to it, okay? Okay. So, like I said, let's start off with the historical angles, the two historical angles of the Bhagavad Gita. A lot of people have heard about the Bhagavad Gita, even in the West. Of course, in India, everybody's heard about the Bhagavad Gita. Even when I travel around in India, even if I speak to a Muslim family on that, they've even heard of the Bhagavad Gita. It's not just people, who are Hindus or into the Vedic scholar and that. Everybody's heard of the Bhagavad Gita. It is incredibly famous. So, but a lot of people don't know actually what it is, though. If you guys want to put up your hands, people who'd heard about the Bhagavad Gita before they came here tonight. I reckon that's more than half the class. You've heard about the Bhagavad Gita, yeah? So it's fantastic. So the Bhagavad Gita, Gita means song. And Bhagavad comes from Bhagavan, meaning God. So it's the song of God, if you want to take the meaning of it. And where it came from was 5,000 years ago. Vedavyas compiled the Mahabharata. Who's heard of the Mahabharata? Yes, yeah. So the Mahabharata, and the Mahabharata is very, very long. It's 100,000 verses, the Mahabharata. Now, and it's made up of 18 parvas. A parva is kind of like a book in itself, and the sixth parva of the Mahabharata is actually where the Bhagavad Gita is contained. It's tucked in there. So tucked inside the Mahabharata is the Bhagavad Gita. So that's, but it has become famous in its own right. Boom, take it out, and there's the Bhagavad Gita. Okay. So this knowledge that was spoken in the Bhagavad Gita, it's actually a description by Krishna about the whole yoga system. And I don't mean hatha yoga with the exercise system. I mean all the deeper aspects of the yoga system. He actually fully expanded and explained the whole yoga system a very, 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 very long time ago to one of his disciples called Vivaswan. And then Vivaswan explained it. In the system a long time ago was that it would be explained from one master to the disciple, and the disciple would realise it and then explain it without corrupting it. So that was the system a long time ago. And so this the knowledge that's contained in the Bhagavad Gita, the whole yoga system, was passed down. But in history, it became lost. So Krishna came again 5,000 years ago, which in the Vedic, I know that sounds a long time, especially when we live in Australia, that sounds a long time. But in the Vedic sense, 5,000 years ago is not that long. So Krishna came 5,000 years ago and he re-spoke the knowledge of the whole yoga system, but he did it in a different context. Because the first time he spoke at all to Vivaswan, he was sitting and he was explaining, right, like that. So the second time he explains it, he sets up a whole different scenario. And it's perfect for us because the scenario he set up was just before a great battle was about to take place. And Arjuna comes to Krishna and asks him questions, and he's answering the questions. So he's speaking that entire yoga knowledge again, but just before a great battle. That's the difference, right? But as we go on, you'll see how perfect that is for all of us, because all of us can actually really relate to Arjuna, to Arjuna's questions, and to Arjuna's situation. I think nowadays it would be very difficult for us to relate to when he spoke to Vivaswan, because Vivaswan was a very perfect personality, and all of us would go, oh, that's not me. But when you hear the scenario set up with Arjuna and Arjuna's questions, you go, my God, that's the exact kind of question I would have liked to have asked. Right? So it's very wonderfully done. So all this knowledge in the Bhagavad Gita was in the Mahabharata for a very long time. But when did the Bhagavad Gita first come to the West? What's the history of that? Because that's the history of how the Bhagavad Gita is sitting over there in India as its jewel. The Bhagavad Gita is considered by many great scholars in India as one of the jewels of India. So it's sitting there, this jewel. How did this jewel come to the West? So the history of that is that in 1770, a gentleman came from England and he worked for the East India Company. Have you guys heard of the East India Company? That was huge, a couple of 100 years ago. It's kind of like comparable, nowadays we've got these huge organisations, Google and all these, they're huge, they're bigger than countries, their power that they have and the money they have and their influence they have. A lot of these big companies nowadays, aren't they? And it's kind of a little bit scary sometimes when you think how influential and how big some of these companies are around the planet. Well, if you go back a few hundred years ago, the East India Company was that kind of idea. It was as huge and as powerful as the British government itself in a lot of ways. So the East India Company was a British company and was in India, and they brought out this gentleman called Charles Wilkins. And as soon as he hit India, he had such a gift for languages. He immediately started learning a lot of the languages because he came from England where it was basically all just English being spoken. So when he got to India, he learned Persian, he learned Sanskrit, which is really what all the Vedic scriptures are written, Sanskrit. He learned a lot of languages as soon as he hit that place. Within a year, he was really masterful in a lot of languages. And the Governor General of India, the British Governor General, noted this. And he asked Charles Wilkins, could he translate the Mahabharata? Because here they had for the first time a British scholar who also learned Sanskrit, who knew Sanskrit, right, which is what the Mahabharata was written in. And so the Governor General went, bingo, here's the opportunity. And so Charles Wilkins started to translate the entire Mahabharata. Well, like I said, it's 100,000 verses. He never finished it. But what he did do was he got up to like the 6th Parva there where the Bhagavad Gita was. And he did the whole Bhagavad Gita. So he translated the Bhagavad Gita. And that became of such interest to this growing interest in the West. It immediately went out to France, it went to England, it went to Germany. In France and Germany, there were a lot of scholars in those days, in the 18th century, who were searching around for more knowledge than what was available in their own culture. And so for the first, they didn't know Sanskrit. So for the first time they had this book, this Bhagavad Gita, coming out of India in English, and they pounced on it, and they translated into French, they translated into German, and so the Bhagavad Gita, boom, it arrives in the West. But the only people that were interested in it at that time, in the 18th century, were really scholarly kind of professor kind of characters, right? So then, if you move forward to the 19th century, what happened in America was this whole movement started in America. It was called the Transcendental movement. And they were called Transcendentalists, and there was Thoreau and Emerson, these great poets and writers. There was a whole cluster of them around the same time. And they were very much interested in, they wanted to know more than just what was available in their own culture. They were all Christians, all of them were Christians, but they wanted to know more. And when they found this Bhagavad Gita in English and that, they brought it back. They brought one back from England, and they brought it back and they shared it. It became like a treasure to them, this Bhagavad Gita. They shared it amongst each other. And they would sit down and discuss it and very much valued it. I think it was Thoreau he went away for about a year to Walden, and he wrote a book on Walden Pond, and he was reading the Bhagavad Gita for a year. He was leading a very simple life, and he was just every day reading Bhagavad Gita and meditating upon what he was reading and that. So it was very influential in the Transcendental movement in the 19th century in America. And then as time, if we bring it up to contemporary times now, it starts to leave and go out into society, not just your heavy hitter thinkers, right? It started to go to just what we call like us ordinary people who started to become interested in the Bhagavad Gita. And more you'd see it. First of all, it started off in, the Philosophical Society, but then it started to go into shops, into kind of esoteric bookshops and things like that. And then it became, this becomes a bit of a product. So a lot of people started translating the Bhagavad Gita or doing their own version of the Bhagavad Gita. And so you start to get a lot of Bhagavad Gitas appearing in shops in the West. And in 1969, well, it's actually 1966, but there was a great transcendental saintly person who left India and came to the West. And he was not only very scholarly, but he was also a great devotee of Krishna. So it's kind of like the perfect combination for somebody to translate a Bhagavad Gita, because the Bhagavad Gita is spoken by Krishna. And previous to this, all the Bhagavad Gitas that were in, France, Germany, America, England, in all these different countries, they were translated by people who were just scholars. A lot of them were just scholars. And they really didn't have that heartfelt conviction that Krishna is the Supreme Person. And so when they do the translations, they put a lot of their own ideas in there. Well, I think it means this, and I think it means that, and I think it means this. And so it was very much, in a lot of sense, watered down from its actual roots. So when this scholar and devotee, his name is Bhaktivedanta, when he came to the West, he saw this in the bookshops. Yeah, so many different editions of Bhagavad Gita. And when he'd open them up, he was so saddened because they were not considering that Krishna, who Krishna is. A lot of them would think, well, he's a myth, or he was just an ordinary person, but he had a good personality. He was charismatic or something like that. They have all these different ideas about him, but none of it was based on realization of who Krishna was. And so he set about and he translated the Bhagavad Gita from Sanskrit. He didn't take a translated edition from Wilkins. He went right to the source in Sanskrit there, and he did it in a very, very scholarly manner. Because first of all, he would have the Sanskrit, and then he would have a transliteration. So it's going from Sanskrit into a transliteration, which is like, it's something that we can read, right? Because Sanskrit, we can't read Sanskrit. And then from the transliteration, he'd go into a translation, and he would tell you what every single word, what it means from Sanskrit to English. And then he would give you the whole verse in English. So it was very scholarly done, so that a person could trace from Sanskrit, which they can't read, but they can do the next steps, and they can trace it step by step in a very scholarly manner. And you can see he's not adding his own ideas to it. He's just going, this is what is being said, to do. And a lot of scholars in America at the time, in the big universities in America, they were absolutely amazed. They'd never seen a Bhagavad Gita so authoritatively and so scholarly translated. And it became the book that was used in a lot of courses in universities in America and that. The first Bhagavad Gita, he called it Bhagavad Gita as it is, right? Not as somebody thinks it is, as it is. So Macmillan, who were the biggest publishers at the time, they approached him and they printed it, but they weren't sure how many would sell. And so they said to him, look, we'll print your Bhagavad Gita as it is, but condense it right down. And they took 400 pages out. And he was very saddened by that, because it wasn't, he wanted it to be done very authoritatively and scholarly. It just ripped through America, like people were like on fire with this Bhagavad Gita. It was fantastic. And by 1972, Macmillan were going, we are printing the entire whole version, okay? And since then, it's just continued. Millions and millions and millions of the Bhagavad Gita as it is have been sold all over the planet and translated into every language you can imagine. So that'll be the Bhagavad Gita that we're going to be, taking our verses from, just so you understand the history of where it's coming from. I think, I don't know if you guys saw it, but I first read the Bhagavad Gita in 1972, but I only had a copy. This is the one that was printed in 68. See, it's a much smaller version. The ones that the other ones are they're about that thick, okay? But I only had access to this one. I didn't even know the other one existed because it didn't come out till 72, and I never saw it then. It was another 2 years before I saw the full version. But this is the first version, and I read this Bhagavad Gita in 1972. Now, that's not why I'm doing the class. It's kind of like, oh my God, she's got seniority of years. She read the Bhagavad Gita in 1972, therefore that makes that she can speak on it. That's not why that I'm trying to pass on and do this class. It's because I've heard what's in the Bhagavad Gita from my teacher, who's heard from his teacher, it goes way back into the mists of time. It's called a disciplic succession, where the Bhagavad Gita is very carefully, like I said, passed down, the knowledge in it, and not corrupted. So I've been studying and hearing from my teacher, and also Bhaktivedanta is they're called a param teacher. It's like he's the teacher of my teacher. So you can see there's this authoritative system set up, and I've just been receiving the knowledge from them, and I'm just passing it on to you how I received it. So it's not based on just the fact that I read it a long time ago, even if I only read it a year ago, but if I received it from hearing from somebody who's not corrupting it, then it's still a jewel. It's still a jewel that hasn't been all dug in and dug about. Yeah. And the Bhagavad Gita is very much, Krishna is speaking to Arjuna how important this is, that you seek out and learn from an authoritative source. It's something that's been lost in the West, in not just India, in a lot of Asian cultures. This is understood, this idea of seeking wisdom from the wise. Yeah, we all know that, yeah. But in the West, we're very much jaded by people who say that they're wise. Because how many times in the West have people been just taken for a ride by, all the pseudo-wise people, right? So we're very jaded by that. But it is actually a time-honoured system. Many years ago, when I was still young, I went to college and I was studying interior design. It was a 3-year course, and a lot of our teachers, we had about 8 different teachers for it, and 3 or 4 of them were actual architects, because we did things like building construction, perspective drawing and things like that. And so we had actual architects come in and teach us for our classes. And at the time, I used to sit there and look at these architects, and they were probably like about 35, 40, and I'd think to myself, why are they here teaching us? If they're such good architects, wouldn't they be busy in the building industry designing houses? Why do they have time to come and teach us? Because I can tell you now, none of them were good teachers. It's not like this, this driven from the heart to pass on this knowledge of architecture. They were basically there to get paid. And so I would just think, I don't think they're very good architects, and that's why they're here. Right? And so whenever they would be giving us our classes, like some of the knowledge that they were giving us was just straight out knowledge. This is how you do perspective drawing, and you do this, da-da-da-da. But a lot of the things they were also teaching us was very subjective. It was things like, what comes first? Is it function or is it form? In those days, in the 70s, and that used to be a big thing. Function, that's how you design something. And then the beauty and the form comes after it? Or does the beauty and the form come first and then you make the function work? This was like, okay, this is how architects do, okay. So they'd have some of these subjects would be like this, and I would sit there thinking, why am I listening to him? He's obviously not a very good architect. So I would argue back, right? Because I basically didn't respect that here was a master. If Frank Lloyd Wright had have come in and done a class, I would have been like warm, I would have been completely quiet, I would have been absorbing everything that Frank Lloyd Wright told me. It's like, wow, this is coming from the master. But I didn't have that same attitude to, what a terrible student I was. Yeah. So in the West, we tend to judge who's teaching us, and I think that's a good thing. It's a good thing, elsewise you get misled. But to be wise, you must seek out the wise teacher, and then you can listen with an open heart and an open ear and really imbibe wisdom, right? So the Bhagavad Gita is spoken by Krishna, who's the supreme person. And Arjuna was all ears. Arjuna was an open heart. He wasn't judging Krishna, like, oh, God, he made a mistake there. Oh, I don't know if I believe that, He was very open-hearted, and he was very much absorbing all this wisdom from Krishna. And so when people read the Bhagavad Gita, if they read it with just a little tiny bit of that attitude, a little tiny bit of openness, that I'm listening to something that is very wise. But if you listen to the Bhagavad Gita, or you read the Bhagavad Gita and you go, I think I'll go and do Lord of the Rings. It's much better. Lord of the Rings is much better. So you know what I mean? Like that, you haven't got that appreciation there. You won't come out of it with anything. You know, like that. You can read lots of books and be very critical of what you're reading, and that's a good idea. But when you're reading something that's actually full of this eternal wisdom, then you have to be a little bit more open-hearted to actually imbibe the wisdom that's being poured out there to you. So that's why we're not going to read some coming from Charles Wilkins. We're not going to read his one, because Charles Wilkins he just was into languages, Sanskrit, Persian, all the different languages, and it was just a theoretical thing to him. But it is quite amazing that even though he had no appreciation for this, what was actually contained in this jewel of the Bhagavad Gita, and he would have put his own slant on a lot of things, there was still enough in there to amaze people and fascinate people in all these different countries around the world. So what to speak of when it's done very nicely. So that's a sort of a backdrop to the Bhagavad Gita. But let's now look at a backdrop to the actual what's happening in the Bhagavad Gita. The first time, before I read the Bhagavad Gita and I was told about it, I was told, here is the Supreme Person speaking to his dear friend Arjuna before a great battle is about to take place. And Arjuna doesn't want to go to battle. And so he's putting forth all these proposals. And it's taking place just before a great battle. And at the time I went, what? How on earth can a sacred book be written just before a great battle? I could understand if it was a book that was written for warriors, and it was all battle plans or something. You know how the British are really into, they still study a lot of the battle plans that took place, in Napoleon and all that. They love to study all this stuff. And the Americans and that's why they get these good battles happening, with strategies and that. But that's not what the Bhagavad Gita is about. It's not about strategies, military strategies. It is far from that. But it's spoken just before a great battle. So how did that come about? So that's why I'm going to give you a little bit of background, because the first time I read the Bhagavad Gita, there was names of people. I'd never seen names like this in my life. I'm born and bred in Brisbane and I'd never seen names like this in my life. And so I'm just going to go through some of these things as a background for you, and I'll actually put them down on a card to hold up, how to pronounce them and that, so they'll be more familiar to you, so that it's not kind of like a roadblock when when I read out some verses from the Bhagavad Gita, you're not going, what was that name again? It'll just kind of be easier for you, yeah. So, as I said, the Bhagavad Gita is just part of the Mahabharata. So the background story is very, very long. I'm not going to go into it. You would have all had to bring sleeping bags, and I would just talk all the way through the night just to get through that, okay? So let's condense it really down to a couple of minutes. There were two great dynasties on the planet, and this is 5,000 years ago, two great dynasties. And there were actually a lot of dynasties, but two very formidable dynasties in different ways. One was called the Kurus or the Kauravas. It's just different ways of saying the same thing. And the Pandus or the Pandavas. You'll hear those two words. It means the same families. So what happened was a king had some sons, and his eldest son was born blind. So usually the eldest son becomes the next son. That was the tradition. But he couldn't become the next king because he's blind. So how can he be a king? How can he really rule these people? When you're in a king, in a managerial position or anything, you really got to be able to read people, haven't you? And it's really a big advantage if you can see their faces, like that. So the king, now his name was Dhritarashtra. He was blind, so he couldn't be the king. Now his brother was named Pandu. So by default, he was the next king. Now, I'll hold these up. Let's see if you guys can see them. Okay, can you guys see them from there?
Yep.
Okay, here's Dhritarashtra, the blind king. And I actually, when you get your notes next week, you'll see I've got underneath it, Dhritarashtra. So you can, so make it easier for you guys, okay? So Dhritarashtra was the blind king. He had many sons, and his eldest son was Duryodhana. Now Duryodhana, he was a very intense person. He was charismatic, and he was able to convince his brothers and others to do things that they normally would never do. He very much wanted to be the next king, but he couldn't because his father is the blind king. So he's the eldest son. He's never going to get to be king. Pandu has 5 sons, of which Arjuna is one of them. They're the ones that'll get to be the king, right? So their father Pandu died when they were quite young, and they had to go and live with Dhritarashtra and all their cousins. Okay, you're getting the idea? And the idea was that they would grow up, they would be taught all the arts of being a king, and when it was time, the eldest of Pandu's sons would take over and be the king. Now, Duryodhana, from the time he was a little boy, and these are his cousins, from the time he is a little boy, he has this burning envy in his heart. How dare one of them be the next king? It should be me. And that envy just grew and grew and grew through his whole childhood until it came to a point when he was a teenager, when he arranged to try and have all his cousins killed. But it didn't work. And that just made him even angrier and angrier. So this is the setup where you have Duryodhana wanting to be the next king. Dhritarashtra, out of all his sons, his favourite son was the bad boy. So Dhritarashtra was not only blind physically, he was blinded morally and spiritually by his attachment to his eldest son. And so his eldest son talked the father into many, many bad situations. And it came to a point when the 5 brothers had grown up. And so Duryodhana knows he's got to get rid of them. So he organises a challenge, a bit like, the Commonwealth Games that are happening down on the Gold Coast. He organises this challenge, but he rigs it. We won't talk about cricket. He rigs it. So this has been going on a long time, hasn't it? He rigs the competition so that they're called the Pandavas. The Pandavas lose. And he organises as punishment that they are exiled for 13 years into the forest. And he knows they're gone now. He didn't even have to kill them. They're exiled for 13 years. They cannot show their face for 13 years or they'll be killed. That's the conditions. So they have to go into the forest for 13 years and stay hidden for 13 years. And he goes, oh, well, obviously he's going to be the next king. So he does it. He achieves it. And he actually has people go into that forest and try to murder them a number of times, but it never works. So then the 13 years of exile are up. The Pandavas come back and they go to Duryodhana and they go to their uncle, Dhritarashtra, and they say, I know you're not going to give us our rightful kingship, but could you please just give us 1 town each, 5 towns, 1 for each brother. And Duryodhana steps forward before his father can answer, and he says to them, we will not give you even the ground for which 1 pin stuck in the ground would take. So you can't even measure that. It's even smaller than when you put your fingers together. Yeah? Meaning, we're not giving you anything. So the Pandavas are now in a situation, they've been putting up with this since they were kids. Their cousins trying to kill them. their cousins rigging matches and making them go to the forest for 13 years. This is like tolerance with a capital T. And it just gets to a point they go, that's it. So a battle is going to take place. And all the princes and kingdoms and all the kingdoms around the place, they all chose their side. They were either going to be on the side of Dhritarashtra and Duryodhana, or they were going to be on the side of the Pandavas. That's the two sides of the battle. Okay? So now you've got a little idea of the build-up before this great battle is about to take place. Now you've got the two sides there, and they choose a place called Kurukshetra. Kurukshetra was actually a very holy place in India, and it's a really huge flat plain. It's there still today. Huge flat plain, and it was perfect for this to stage this great war on. And so the two parties were lined up on either side. They had elephants, chariots, they had bowmen, they had everything, and they're very expert warriors with all different strategies, and they're all waiting. And how they would begin a battle in those days is that the general, the supreme general for one side, would blow a conch shell. And then all of his generals would blow their conch shell. And then on the other side, the supreme general would retaliate and blow his conch shell, and all those generals. And you'd hear this conch shell ringing out, the vibration ringing out up into the atmosphere. And every soldier knew, now we are about to begin this great battle. But before this moment, because actually the Brahmins would work out on astrology charts the exact moment when those conch shells should be blown. And so this hasn't happened yet. All the armies are lined up, and Arjuna is there, and Arjuna says to Krishna, can you take me on the chariot down through the middle? Because down the middle there's nobody, right? There's two huge armies. He said, take me down the middle. I want to see for myself who I am about to go into battle with. So Krishna takes him down in the chariot, and Arjuna's looking, and he's seeing there were so many of his friends that had chosen to be on Duryodhana's side. A lot of times because of political reasons and things like that. And Arjuna's seeing his friends, he's even seeing some family members, and he's looking at them. And he turns to Krishna. Krishna stops the chariot. And he says to Krishna, I can't do this. Arjuna was an infallible warrior. He was not afraid of fighting. It's a warrior spirit is not something we can understand unless you're another warrior. A warrior spirit, they don't mind going into battle. You even have nowadays, you have, American soldiers and British soldiers and that, and you talk to them and they want to go into battle. They're not afraid, right? That's why conscription never really works. When you conscript people, like they have in the Vietnam War and that, they did a lot of conscriptions because you get people who don't want to fight, but they're made to go in, like that. And they have a very hard time. But if you have a battle going on and it's warriors who want to be in battle, it's a whole different playground happening, right? So Arjuna was this great warrior, and he was not afraid at all. They're actually not afraid of dying. Like, come on, seriously, most of us, are afraid of dying, right? If a bomb goes off somewhere, we run for it, right? Things like that. But a warrior will turn around and go, where did that come from? I'm going for it. Right? So here was Arjuna And he's considering, I don't want to fight. And he presents to Krishna all these reasons why he shouldn't go into battle. And the first time I'm reading the Bhagavad Gita, because I don't know what's all happening, I'm just reading it. It's all new to me, every single verse, and I'm reading it. So we're up to the part where Arjuna is presenting, I'm not going to fight Krishna for this reason, and I'm going, yeah, right on. Every single reason that Arjuna presented, I was going, right, that makes so much sense. I'm totally behind everything he's saying, right? And then we get to the thing, and then Krishna says to him, where has this unintelligence come from in you? I'm going, what? I thought for sure Krishna would agree with all this, And so then Krishna starts speaking to Arjuna. And of course, the wisdom coming from Krishna just blew my mind. It blew my mind. He was clearing up every single misconception that Arjuna had. And I knew that I had. I knew I had every single one of those misconceptions too. So what I'm going to do now is just read chapter 1. So now you've got a background. I'm going to read, chapter 1 is made up of 46 verses. I'm just going to read 9. I cherry-picked 9 verses out of chapter 1 for you, and it's called Observing the Armies on the Battle of Kurukshetra. So now you've got a background, let's go into it, and of course let's do verse 1. So you guys are much more advantaged than I was, because I hadn't even read all these names or anything. So chapter 1, verse 1. Dhritarashtra said, so that's the blind king, right? Oh yes, let me backtrack a little bit. Dhritarashtra was blind, right? So when this great battle is about to take place, he can't go into battle. So he has to stay in his capital city, Hastinapur, which is now New Delhi in India. He has to stay in his palace. And can you imagine how frustrating that is for him? That here is all his sons, relatives, everybody he's known his whole entire life. They're going to go into battle, and some of them are on his son's side and some of them are on the other side, and he doesn't know what's going on. And he can't even be there to hear everything going on, because he's too much of a liability for people to protect him. And at that point, Vedavyas, who's this great saintly person, arrived there in the palace and said to the blind king, I can give you the mystical abilities that you can see what's happening on the Battle of Kurukshetra. Even though he's going to be in his capital city, he's not on the battlefield, I can give you the mystical ability to see what's happening. Do you want that? And the blind king said, no, please don't. I could not take the pain of seeing my sons and my nephews. I couldn't take the pain of seeing them being killed. I don't want that ability. So then Vedavyas turns to his disciple who's there, called Sanjay, and he's the secretary for the king. And he said, I will give that ability to Sanjay. And Sanjay can see everything that's happening in real time as it's happening, and then he can tell you. So you don't have to see what's happening, but he can tell you everything that's happening. And the king was very much. So Sanjay he's the secretary. So you'll see in the Bhagavad Gita, this is coming into it all the time. Sanjay says to Dhritarashtra, and he tells him everything that's happening on this battlefield, okay? So now let's start first verse. Dhritarashtra says, O Sanjay, after my sons and the sons of Pandu assembled in the place of pilgrimage at Kurukshetra, desiring to fight, what did they do? Verse 2. Sanjay says, O king, after looking over the army arranged in military formation by the sons of Pandu, Duryodhana went to his teacher and spoke the following words. So now for the next 11 verses, Duryodhana is speaking to his teacher, and they're all picking up their conch shells and blowing their conch shells. So a very in-depth description is given of each great fighter, and their conch shells had names. And they would pick up their conch shell and they would blow their conch shell. And all the soldiers that were in that unit would feel very fortified hearing their general blowing his conch shell. And then the Pandavas picked up their conch shells and blew their conch shells. The difference being, though, that when the Kauravas blew their conch shells, their soldiers became fortified. Ah, yes, this is our general. But when the Pandavas blew their conch shells, it broke the hearts of all the Kaurava soldiers. They actually felt very threatened just hearing the conch shell of the Pandavas. So now we're going to go to verse 20, 21 to 22. Now Arjuna is talking to Krishna, okay? And when Arjuna addresses Krishna throughout the Bhagavad Gita, he doesn't always go, "Oh Krishna." Sometimes he will address him with various names and terminologies, and in this one he goes, Arjuna said, "O infallible one, please draw my chariot between the two armies, so that I may see those present here who desire to fight, and with whom I must contend in this great trial of arms." Verse 26. There Arjuna could see, within the midst of the armies of both parties, his fathers, grandfathers, teachers, maternal uncles, brothers, sons, grandsons, friends, and also his father-in-laws and well-wishers. So he's observing who is there. Verse 28, Arjuna said, "My dear Krishna, seeing my friends and relatives present before me in such a fighting spirit, I feel the limbs of my body quivering and my mouth drying up. My whole body is trembling. My hair is standing on end. My bow, Gandiva, is slipping from my hand and my skin is burning." Have any of you ever experienced such trauma that you felt that your skin is burning, your whole body is quivering, you can't even hold anything, you're so weak, your limbs? This is the point that Arjuna was at, because of the decision that now had to be made to go into this battle to fight and kill all these people he'd known all his life. Not just one person he'd known. Imagine if you had to go into battle with one person you'd grown up with. He's talking about everybody. So then he starts speaking to Krishna. "I do not see how any good can come from killing my own kinsmen in this battle, nor can I, my dear Krishna, desire any subsequent victory, kingdom, or happiness." So he's saying, what's the point of going into battle if I win? I don't want the kingdom. I don't want the victory. I don't want it because it's all full of blood. So what's the point of going into this battle, right? So Arjuna now presents in the next 15 verses why he shouldn't engage in battle. He presents reasoning from every possible angle. Now, verse 46. So this is the last verse in chapter 1. Sanjaya said, so he's telling the king, Arjuna, having thus spoken on the battlefield, cast aside his bow and arrows and sat down on the chariot, his mind overwhelmed with grief. So that's how the first chapter leaves. That Arjuna is completely overwhelmed by grief. And every single one of us will experience sometimes in our life being overwhelmed with grief. Every single one of us will. Nobody's going to ever escape that. It's just that some people may experience it 2 or 3 times, somebody might experience it 10 times. Everybody will experience being overwhelmed with grief. Because everybody will experience somebody that is very dear to them, leaving them, walking away from them, or dying. And you just get overwhelmed with grief. So Arjuna is being brought to this point of just being totally overwhelmed and not knowing what to do now. What does he do about this situation? He can't just walk off. It's actually not possible because the battle's going to take place anyway, isn't it? What can he do about it? So this is how we leave the end of chapter 1. And Krishna hasn't spoken to him yet. He's let Arjuna do all the pouring out of the heart. And everything that Arjuna says is things that we can all relate to, I guarantee you. And then Krishna in chapter 2 begins speaking the wisdom to him. So in our next lesson, we will start with chapter 2, this step-by-step wisdom that Krishna, Krishna is like the ultimate dad. He really is speaking to Arjuna in a very step-by-step manner so that Arjuna can understand it, he can absorb it. Because what's the point of somebody explaining something to you when you're suffering so much and it just goes over the top of your head? You can't grab onto it. So Krishna is like, they have grief counsellors and things like that nowadays. Krishna's like the ultimate grief counsellor, okay? So we'll start chapter 2 next week with what does Krishna say? What does Krishna say about this? And it's something that all of us can really relate to at different points in our life, this wisdom that's going to be now handed on to Arjuna. So I think that's enough for the first part because there was a lot of history and things like that. You guys have been amazing just sitting there. I don't think anybody's gone to sleep. You guys are amazing. So, and I'll give you out you'll all get those things next week, plus next week, so that you can mull over and things like that. This wonderful wisdom. To me, the Bhagavad Gita is like the ultimate. There's many yoga scriptures. There's the Srimad Bhagavatam. There's 18,000 verses in the Srimad Bhagavatam. There's all sorts of these wonderful books of wisdom. But to me, the Bhagavad Gita it's the foundation. It's the foundation of a lot of very practical knowledge. It's not esoteric. A lot of people try to make the Bhagavad Gita esoteric, because they actually don't want to enter into the wisdom. They want to step back from it and pretend they understand it and do word jugglery. That's not what the Bhagavad Gita is about. It's Krishna reaching out to each single one of us because we're all his children. And he's reaching out to every one of us going, I know you're suffering. I know you're in anxiety. I know you're confused. Now here's the wisdom that will bring you out of that confusion. Here's the medicine. There's a great saintly person 500 years ago called Sanatana Goswami, and he describes these yoga texts, and especially the Bhagavad Gita, he describes them as being like a treasure map. And if you follow it, but you have to have an expert guide, and you follow the guide, and you follow all these things, you'll find the treasure. And he said the treasure is actually already there in your heart. The treasure is a revitalization of your loving relationship with the Supreme Person. That's the treasure. So all the Vedic books are all about you rediscovering the treasure that's already there, right? I remember when I was a kid at school, we'd do geography in primary school. And one time, one of our teachers, we had to all draw a map. We all had individual projects, and we had to draw a map of an island. And we had a list of things we had to mark on the map. There had to be a bay, there had to be an isthmus, and there had to be mountains, there had to be a lake. So we had all these things we had to draw. And then the teacher wanted to make it a bit more fun for all of us, and so she said, "Okay, there's going to be a buried treasure somewhere on your little island, right? And you have to do all the little dots and all the little clues how to get to your buried treasure, right?" And all of us knew as individuals there really wasn't a buried treasure there. And we weren't experts, and we didn't know how to find a non-existent buried treasure, but we went along for the fun of it because it was fun, right? But when Sanatana Goswami is speaking about these scriptures as being like a treasure map, he's talking about it's for real. Okay, it's for real. The treasure is for real. So I think even in the Bible they have this saying. Is it Matthew? I think it's in Matthew in the Bible that your treasure lies in your heart. That's where your real treasure is, and it's true. Okay, so we can listen to all the businessmen and all this sort of stuff, and they tell us what treasures are, the latest iPhone and, the latest this and all of these treasures. They're not really, okay? That's one of the secrets coming from the Bhagavad Gita. They're not really treasures, okay? The treasure already is there inside your heart, that you have a loving relationship with God, but you've just let it get covered over with all the false treasures of the world. So the Bhagavad Gita is a treasure map, and I hope you guys get fascinated by it, and we'll do class 2 next week. So has anybody got any questions at all? I don't care what they are.
So have you found your treasure for real?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
Would you like to share more about it, or?
We're all individuals, and we all have individual loving relationships with the Supreme Person. And it's described, it's a very deep subject, and it's described in the, in the introduction to the Bhagavad Gita in there. Bhaktivedanta is describing that we all have relationships of there's 5 different flavours of relationship with the Supreme Person, and we'll all have one of those particular flavours. And even then, it will be very personal and individual. But there's 5 flavours of relationship with the Supreme Person. And people can have a relationship with the Supreme Person it's almost like a neutral relationship where they have respect and they're in awe. But it's very much like an awe relationship. But they are feeling very satisfied with that relationship. Other living entities, other souls have relationships where the Supreme Person is your best friend. And you see this sometimes in some of the saintly people when they're relating to the Supreme Person. You can feel this deep friendship they have with the Supreme Person. Lord Jesus Christ was exhibiting this relationship with the Supreme Person, was his Father. Yeah, that father-son relationship. So that is there. So there's these different relationships, and each one of us has one particular relationship, and even within that, it is very individual, and it is all satisfying. that relationship that we have. But we tend to look for it here in the material world. We tend to turn away and look for it here, and everybody's looking for it here. And we always get disappointed and we get frustrated and we get brokenhearted, because the ultimate is to sustain that relationship in this lifetime, and then the person dies. So we all have actual eternal relationships with the Supreme Person. That's not interfered with the body that you have. It's heart to heart, soul to soul, from the individual soul with the Supreme Soul. But it's a very deep subject, you just asked. Does anybody else have a question?
You mentioned that the Blind King's Palace was in what is now New Delhi.
Yep.
In India, where the battle took place, where is that now?
Kurukshetra is a couple of hours out of Delhi.
So northwest?
North. Yeah. You can look it up on a map.
Okay.
You'll see Kurukshetra on a map. Yeah, it's there.
Okay.
Yeah. Hastinapur. Hasti means elephant, and Pur means like a city, a place. And so Hastinapur was this great seat of government a long time ago in India, and it was so rich that it had these elephants walking down the street, dripping with all sorts of, beautiful blankets and jewels and all sorts of things, and then people riding them and that. It was very opulent. And it was the seat of government that King Dhritarashtra ruled from. But now it's Delhi, and I don't know if you guys ever been to Delhi, but there's just a lot of pollution happening, okay? Is there any other question? Is that okay?
Yeah. We were there last year.
Oh,
yeah. So
you were in Delhi, were you?
Delhi.
Okay.
And we went sort of headed north, and I thought, I wonder if we actually
look it up on the map. It's very much. You'd have to very, very, very specifically go to it.
Okay.
It's not on a particular route. And when you go to Kurukshetra, there is a temple there on a kund. A kund is like a bathing place. There's a temple there where they have to the Bhagavad Gita, where it was spoken. Where Arjuna and Krishna were, and it was like they built a temple there. And pilgrims will go there to offer their respect to that great dialogue that was spoken by Krishna. Yeah. Has anybody else got any questions?
Can I ask a question?
It's my sister who's going to ask a question. Okay.
I just wondered, just off the top of your head, can you remember any of the reasons Arjuna gave why he didn't want to fight? Or is that too long a question?
Yeah, he gave lots of reasons, lots. And they were the ones that we would probably give. Seriously, like, this is my family. Why would I want to kill my family, right? And to do things like that, for a family member to kill another family member just to attain, like a kingdom or something, it is so inauspicious. It's beyond just the act of killing. The reason you're killing is so inauspicious, to gain something, that it brings inauspiciousness to the entire family line and things like that. So he's saying it's not even just me that's going to, it's, and he's just expanding it out and expanding it out. And he's going, I'm just going to go to the forest. I'm going to walk away now, and I'm going to go to the forest and just become a sage. But that's not the answer, is it? That's not. And these are all the sorts of things that we would come up with, isn't it? Have you guys ever experienced that? You're going through something really heavy in your life. You don't know where to turn to. You don't know what the answer is, and you go, I'm just going to go and rent a cabin up at Mount Nebo for a week and get away from everybody. It's kind of like the mini version of what Arjuna was proposing, stuff like that. And so Krishna's going, no, there's no point running away. We're going to talk about this. Okay, so I think we might, how about we just have a little 5-minute chant to end it off. And then I think there's some things over there. What's over there? Where's Sarala? What's there?
Some vegan chai.
There's some vegan chai.
Will we bring the chai around while they're chanting then?
Sure.
So if you've got some hot chai just to refresh yourself, so when you're driving home nobody has any accidents or anything. So let's have a little...
Should we do the same mantra?
Yeah, may as well. Cause,
Okay, same one?
yeah, because the mantra we're doing is Krishna, Hare
Yeah,
Krishna.
it's about Krishna.
Yeah, because this is about Krishna, isn't it? It's him talking.
Yeah.
So we'll do that just for 5 minutes and while you guys have some hot chai. And
I'd love for you guys to join in if you can. Otherwise, just listen's fine.
And I want to thank everybody so much for coming, and I hope you come next week. Otherwise, I might bring some. I'm gonna make you guys feel guilty. I am going to print out ones for everybody, so you better come and get them. Okay, thank you very much. Namaste. Namaste.